This panel will transition us from the social innovation we heard earlier and the social trends and messaging to crowdsourcing as a strategy for innovation and even for research, strategic research, and all how that also helps to facilitate improved modernization in government and collaboration. So to begin, I'm joined by Dr. Vicki Whitmore. She oversees a grant portfolio that includes basic, translational, and clinical studies on epilepsy. These include grants on sudden, unexpected death in epilepsy and seizure localization studies. She also oversees a grant portfolio on myalgic chronic fatigue syndrome and fatigue. She is interested in research on global health issues, stigma, and comorbidities. Great. Those are some large words in that bio. We also are grateful to be joined by Dina Lambert. She is the diversity lead, diversity, equity, and inclusion manager at NASA. Dina leads a strategic effort that ensures NASA's early stage innovations and partnerships portfolio of over 700 funding opportunities incorporates sound DEIA practices and strategies. She works to ensure the funding, usually raised through crowdsourcing and prize competitions, is dispersed without bias and is fair. Lastly, we're joined by Commander Laura Springer, Innovation Manager, Office of Research Development, Test and Evaluation, Innovation at the United States Coast Guard. She brings great experience from the military industry, specifically government, operational planning, risk assessment, leadership, and data analysis. She leads the United States Coast Guard's Ideas at Work program. So thank you for joining us. I'm hoping we could have a little bit of discussion. I've teed up some questions, and then if time permits, some of our audience can also ask a few questions. Okay, so to kick us off, what exactly are we talking about around crowdsourced innovation and crowdsourcing innovation programs? So Vicki, can you lead us off by describing a little bit of your program and how it's used to advance research and collaboration?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So at NIH, the traditional way to get feedback from the community was to publish a request for information through the Federal Register. What happens then, that goes out. You maybe get a few, depending on what the question is, you get some responses, but it's not a conversation. It's not a discussion. And so I was in charge of organizing a very large epilepsy conference that was meant to discuss and revise epilepsy research benchmarks. So we had a committee that developed the benchmarks. We wanted to put those out to the community and said, we're not doing an RFI. We're doing something innovative. And I've heard about IdeaScale and said, this is what we want to do. We want to put this out there, have it be a discussion where the community can have feedback they can discuss with one another. And that was the first campaign we did actually from NINDS. We brought IdeaScale in to specifically for that campaign. And then I more recently did an even much larger campaign around research priorities for chronic fatigue syndrome. So we use it as a way to both get feedback, but also have a community discussion.
Great, thank you. Dina, can you describe NASA's innovation program briefly and how you incorporate crowdsourcing and DIA practices?
Sure. So I'm specifically with the Space Technology Mission Directorate, and what our job is to do technological investment in the capabilities that we want to enable our missions in the future, 5, 10, 20 years down the line. And we do that through grants, contracts. But the really awesome area that we can use innovative ideas is through crowdsourcing, prizes, and challenges. So we do it internally within our NASA workforce. At one point we called it NASA at Work. Now it's NASA Spark. But we also use it externally through our NASA Tournament Lab, where we have vendors that can help facilitate our prizes and challenges. And we can design it to be as simple as hey, can you code an algorithm for us that'll help with image processing to, hey, do you have solutions for bringing in new talent? So it can take a lot of different shape, both internally and externally. It can also go from low dollar value to actually something more significant and lead on to uh, efforts that you see in the form of grants or contracts later on. So.
Thank you. Laura, what about the U.S. Coast Guard?
Hi. So the Coast Guard is an organization of about 40,000 people, which they're actually more New York City policemen and firefighters than there are members of the Coast Guard. So we have 11 statutory missions, which range from search and rescue to aids to navigation. So we are doing a lot of different things. We have people operating in the Arctic. We have ships in the Antarctic. So what we've really used the tool is to engage the workforce. Our foundational belief is that every coastie is an innovator. So the platform gives everyone from the non-rate working in Coos Bay the voice to bring it to the attention that senior leadership that he or she doesn't have a driver's license. How am I going to get a driver's license if I'm not allowed to drive a government vehicle? So we really use the platform to engage all levels of the workforce. Right now we have a lot of focused challenges, but we always keep it open. And our open idea forum has gotten a lot of really neat things that we think kind of really improve the overall health of the workforce. For example, last year we added 40 religions to our human resources system.
Mhm.
So we really rely on the crowdsourcing to give us what we're not seeing. Our headquarters building is located in Anacostia. And we don't know what's going on in the field. So it really is a tool for us to engage with all levels of the organization.
Thank you. Wow. So a takeaway is government is doing amazing work already. Um, in, internal problem solving that may result in grants, internal problem solving that strengthens an entire workforce to deliver its key services to protect our coasts, and then also external crowdsourcing around strategic medical health research, all being done. So my next question is, that's a lot of ideas, a lot of submissions, a lot of maybe some bad ideas in there too. How do you briefly, describe your process, uh, and also how do you take those ideas and actually translate them into something that's valuable, particularly financially valuable, but not necessarily? Vicky?
So it's a challenge with, especially with the second campaign I did, we had hundreds of ideas. And trying to synthesize all of that into really what was important was really a challenge. But from that, what we developed was a research roadmap that's helping to guide our research priorities and help the community to understand these are the priorities that NIH is interested in supporting. So there's a lot of interesting science that could be done, but what the whole emphasis of the thing our program was is what do we need to do and what do we need to know to get to clinical trials. So that was really the focus, and really we had amazing feedback from especially individuals who are affected with chronic fatigue syndrome, who really provided amazing feedback. But I was telling Sarah it's a real challenge right now because we delivered the roadmap program and report to our council in May. And now the community is saying, okay, where's the dollars? Where's the research? What's coming next? And in the current budget climate, it's really challenging.
Sounds challenging. And it sounds like you're not starting at zero. You're having a research like hypothesis, and you're getting the crowd to also like build consensus around the areas that make the most sense. And that in and of itself is a value that
That's correct.
that our
Yep.
mission is aligned with what external experts think is the most valuable things that we need to do.
And what, most importantly, what the people with the disease need and think is most important.
Awesome. So the end user, almost, to use a different term. Fantastic. Dina, so it ends with grants. So before you invest, into these ideas, you need to have some kind of like some numbers on
Mhm.
what makes sense, so what's feasible, desirable, viable. How do you guys go about it?
So we actually use our prizes, challenges, crowdsourcing platform as kind of like a scouting of, hey, what's out there, what's happening. It's shifting from just an RFI, kind of thing where it's a one-way conversation. We can use kind of the prizes platform so that we can have more of a conversation, a dialogue. We can use webinars to kind of spark that excitement. We use our vendors to get the word out. And also the various communities out there who are able to kind of see, are there startups, are there individuals, because that's the great thing about, let's say, the underpinning of crowdsourcing is having the Competes Act that gives you that authority to utilize the public, small entities, individuals, academia, industry. And then what we've been doing is utilizing our both our workforce for those that want to participate as reviewers and evaluators of those ideas, but we also want to value the time of volunteers out in the public by offering the honorarium so that they get a chance to be a part of either voting or looking at what ideas are really credible. And you can set up a prize to have multiple stage gates so then you can funnel the ideas upward so that you come in, let's say, with a couple of hundred ideas. You can narrow it down to 50. You can host a voting platform so that you get the top winners.
Thank you. Laura?
So we kind of use it two separate ways. We use it to actually help us develop our research portfolio. We allow everyone in the Coast Guard, if they have a problem, to submit it, and then we senior leaders vote using strategy and guidance to see if this is something that should be pursued. But on the Open Idea Forum, what we do is we look to find sponsors to see if they're interested in transitioning the idea. The bulk of ideas do not get transitioned, but we push them out there and we look for people who are interested in transitioning these ideas. And the other way that we use it that's we found very valuable is in hurricane seasons that are predicted to be particularly severe. We open a challenge at the beginning of the year, and then we learn what other units that are doing that is successful. For example, in Hurricane Harvey, we had one of our most successful challenges, and other units were able to go on and see that people were using text messaging or social media to find people.
Mm.
And then finally, we also use it to just figure out what programs need. If a program comes to us, for example, we our most commented on challenge was we did a recruiting challenge which had over 1,600 votes and comments when the Coast Guard was struggling to meet our recruiting needs. And we have since met the recruiting needs and we have closed the challenge down. So.
Thank you. Do you have a question for Laura?
I mean that is pretty awesome to, and how broad of a requirement that you guys set within that prize to meet your recruiting goals? Did you mirror what your standard requirement is, or how did you kind of funnel in, and what was, yeah?
So we really just funneled our ideas to the people who had money and funding,
Mhm.
and they implemented them.
Thank you. I guess one follow-up question that I have is, taking so many ideas, getting towards the consensus, or getting to the point where you could do the honorariums or grants, getting to the point where you could decide these ideas are going to stay, these are the ones that actually going to become projects. The software enables voting, commenting, assessing. Do you also like, or can you describe how you use like maybe like advisory boards or other like key groups of subject matter experts to kind of review like a smaller subset of all of the ideas or applications or research submissions? You want, go ahead.
Sure, I'll start. So I read most of them, and sometimes I filter things to the innovation knowledge base. I really try not to, because of that founding belief that we believe that every COSI is an innovator, and we really believe that everything that has people took the time out of their day to submit something and they want to improve the organization. But what we do is we, as an innovation program, we read them. there are some that some actually the crowd answers. They'll have a question. One that comes to mind was the Navy gets a maternity uniform allowance. And somebody asked, why doesn't the Coast Guard? And then somebody links the policy. So we spend a lot of time reading, and then we have every program has a designated representative that we send the idea to.
Great. Dina or Vicky, do you want to try?
So I know for a prize that I just ran this past year, which was the Space Tech Catalyst Prize, it was meant to find out who were these smaller innovators that were out there in the local communities that were not coming up in our kind of proposer pipeline. And so we wanted to identify organizations that were out there doing it. So I used a mix of internal workforce. I did a workforce spark challenge to find out who wanted to serve as judges or evaluators and what expertise they brought, and also externally from, let's say, DoD or industry, just so that we had a good perspective, because we were looking for proposers that could come across a lot of different tech capability areas. And so it was actually pretty nice. I, as the prize owner, took the feedback from our reviewers as their ranking and rating, so that I could have a little bit of distance from kind of the outcome. But it was a great experience to have someone from our prize community kind of shepherd me as a prize owner through the process and let me know kind of what are some of the best practices when you get to crowdsourcing, and that was really helpful. But I know that that takes kind of protecting and strengthening the kind of prize infrastructure or crowdsourcing infrastructure, that if you're going to do innovation, you have to protect and create that wedge for it to happen.
Yeah, so our standard practice at NIH is for any kind of strategic planning process we do, we put a working group in place that includes clinicians, researchers, individuals with the disease, people with lived experience, and their caregivers. So when we do a crowdsourcing campaign, for the campaigns, I read every one of those and summarized them, because we got to the end and realized I wasn't allowed at NIH to use any kind of AI tool. So many sleepless nights summarizing everything. But then all of that went back to that advisory committee that then reviewed all of that input, and where there was one response or where there were 100 responses, to really understand the pulse of the community and what we were hearing.
Great. Let me switch up a little bit. I know we're covering large government crowdsourced innovation and research programs, so it's very wide. And now I'm going to kind of go to just like, if you could wave a magic wand, given all of these stakeholders, all of these ideas, what improvements with your community, your leaders, or your process will greatly strengthen the outcomes of your program? Magic wand. Laura?
So mine is a little unique. I would, every decision maker in Coast Guard headquarters, I would give them a virtual reality headset and then put them in the scenario that is being described. You said I had a magic wand. So, and then I would just have them walk a mile in someone's shoes and see, hey, maybe I can do something about this. Because a lot of the best innovations are small innovations that make the workforce happier. For example, this braid in my hair was not authorized 4 years ago. So I think just making sure that the decision makers understand why people are taking time out of their busy day to try to make their organization better.
That's amazing. I'm thinking Apple Vision Pro can help even empathize, to your point, but also start to prototype it with the end users. Vicky or Dina?
I think I would probably, along with having the decision makers, really kind of spend some time with, let's say, the crowdsourcing, the solver community, because that's where you get to the stories of impact of what does it mean. How many hours of time does it save because you came to an idea through crowdsourcing that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to come up with because you're stuck in a lab somewhere. I think sometimes within government, we choose ideas based on who is in the closest proximity to the either the decision maker or the resources officer who has the purse strings for your PPPE, process. I think with cross crowdsourcing, if you're able to get to the essence of telling a story and the impact and giving the workforce the ability to engage in that, you'll probably get richer solutions, or at least get to the heart of what problems are they sitting with that they need help with, that either procurement or contracting is putting too much of a box, on them. And I think that's where prizes, um, and the crowdsourcing platform can lower a barrier to entry that we've seen. So let's say we have a program called Flight Opportunities, and before we were using grants and contracts for that type of funding area, and what we found is that we only saw large businesses with components that are churning out proposals over and over again. But when we went shifted to either crowdsourcing or challenge platform, we saw ideas coming from graduate students, universities that are just starting out into the flight ops area. And that's where we were seeing riskier ideas, but ones that as an agency, we can take on that risk a little bit more, especially for those early stage concepts. But what I'd love to see ultimately is us telling those stories of impact so that it kind of piques that interest to come back and use it more.
Yeah, for me, it's interesting because our leadership, at least at the institute I work at, has absolutely embraced the getting the external feedback. What we haven't done as much, I mean, it's so interesting hearing these two speak, is we really haven't used it to get internal feedback. And I would love to see it implemented. There's so many times when there's an email that goes out or something on Teams and there's, some back and forth, but to have it all in IdeaScale saying, what's your idea around this? Or just an open idea platform would be fantastic to really implement that as a way to hear internally what people are thinking and to get that feedback. That would be,
Yeah.
that
And
would is what I wish.
I know internally for us, for our crowdsourcing effort, our group sets aside some funding. So, if a prize owner or challenge owner doesn't have funding for themselves, because that's the barrier for a lot of folks, they have problems, but they may not have the funding to help solve it, or at least to go search out the ideas to solve it. So that's where we do keep a funding set aside, where we do a call out, annually to say, hey, we're soliciting problems that you need help solving, and we'll help you frame out the size and scope of that. So then it does spur that on so that you can get that internal engagement. So
Thank you. Um, so without leading the witness here, do you see any trends emerging that might affect how you engage your communities going forward? Anyone, Vicky?
So yes, the two campaigns I did were 4 years apart, and it was really they were significantly different in that the communities were different. In that the second community, many of the individuals are housebound, bedbound. They live on their computers, and so it was like natural for them to do this crowdsourcing. They loved it. The epilepsy community, not so much, and people had really struggled with using the platform. Part of it was that we were new to it as well. But I think there was just such a difference in the ability of the people to be able to use it as a way to provide the feedback. And I think that's what we're seeing in some of the other campaigns that our institute has done.
Got it. So it really back to like meeting your end users where they're at. It's like literally, is this the
Absolutely.
best tool and even message to outreach to them? Dina?
um I know, like someone said earlier, that AI is everywhere. I think the challenge that we have in government is that we are much slower to either accept it, embrace it, use it, or encourage it. And I think if I could have a magic wand that somehow we could bridge that gap, because I think outside in society, they are ready. They are using it in really fascinating ways to either generate idea or give them the bandwidth back so they can come up with those really crisp ideas. But sometimes the blockage for us is that we'll say, no, you cannot use AI as part of either your proposal or idea. And I think that's an artificial barrier that we've got to do something with because outside they're ready. So not to say we can't have some safeguards, but I think we've got to figure it out. I think we're getting there more recently within the last year, but knowing the acceleration of technology and how people adopt it and accept it, we've got to kind of move forward on it.
I have to agree. I think the AI implementation and allowing the workforce to use it effectively without having to fill out forms, get permission from the CIO, get permission from their supervisor, take an online training. I just have to reiterate that how we implement AI is going to have a huge impact on crowdsourcing and innovation.
So it's like the trend is right there, but there's so much barriers or needs that you have to go through just to be able to access what's right there in front of you. Yeah, on the IdeaScale side, similar to AI in our personal lives, helping us write letters or emails quicker, AI on the front end could help formulate initial idea concepts into full-fledged out idea submissions. And then the other side of that trade-off is, well, then that might be like a large submission and nobody has time to read all of that too, because you can generate so much content. Right?
We actually had someone who was using AI to comment on things, and there was a lot of reading involved.
Great. I think we have some time for some questions from the audience, but before I do, as we wrap up and invite our participants to ask some questions, what would you say to some of our participants who might be inspired to lead a crowdsourced innovation program, research initiative, but they may be a little hesitant to do so? Parting thoughts, Vicky?
Know your community, know who you are seeking feedback from is critical. And I think what we learned is to really pilot it, to make sure that the campaign you're putting out there is meeting the needs and is going to get the kind of responses that you're looking for.
Know your community. Are you asking the right questions to the crowd?
Right.
Yeah. Dina?
And I think possibly just taking those small iterative steps. I think I don't want to say setting expectations low, but you've got to start somewhere. So you can start out with an internal workforce, challenge. It may not cost anything to actually do it, but just start out really small, whether you do it for branch or division or directorate. You've got to start somewhere. You don't have to have this scaled kind of massive program, but it can get there. You just have to start out small and then do it with a spirit of learning that, let's say your first challenge or prize doesn't work. That's okay. That's the spirit of learning.
Great feedback. Why go out to the larger world when you could just start with your own employee base and your own organizations and build confidence there, and then reach out? Laura?
We really believe that none of us is as smart as all of us. So it's kind of trusting your crowd and being willing to listen to the crazy idea to get that diamond.
Fantastic. Audience, participants, any questions? Yes.
So thank you very much for your sharing. It's interesting to hear some of the ways that you're doing campaigns. One of the questions I wanted to raise was as you do the campaigns and when you do reach the point of making decisions of which ones are accepted and acted on, is there a way that you capture and track the ideas that have been given in the past, and if those are relevant to future situations that come up that those ideas may map to? Do you use that methodology, or is that strategy active in any of your processes there?
I do know that our prize community is starting to set up a community of practice for those that are prize owners, campaign owners, so that we can learn from each other. I think the results come back to the prize owner to say, hey, the ideas that were generated, here they are. I That's where I may be stepping out of my own lane of knowledge because I don't know that that information is shared. Maybe it is, but I think that is why we're starting up that community of practice so that it is shared, that it is captured, that you do have this knowledge or wealth of knowledge that you're collecting, that it can be either adapted or applied or say, hey, we've done it before. What tweaks can we make for the next challenge to make it even better?
Yeah, I would say the same. I think in terms of the research priorities that we have in our campaigns, they end up in a report. And so it's something, it's not a report that then sits on a shelf. It's a living document that we go back to and say, okay, we're now tackling the first three. How can we tackle the next five? And in terms of the same, the sort of the community of practice, I can't tell you how many different groups within my institute and other institutes at NIH I've already talked to about doing a campaign, things to think about. I now have a slide set that I share with people about, just sort of lessons learned in terms of how to, some of the mistakes we made and how to do things in a better way.
We really rely on the software actually links ideas. So if there's a previous idea that is similar, we use that feature, and then we also use keywords a lot.
Great.
It's interesting to hear the chronic fatigue syndrome, which almost seems to be in the shadow of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's in your institute. And I just wonder how important it is to have, say, a celebrity like Michael J. Fox or someone else from a private, from outside the government, influence the research priorities in your institute or any of the other 30 NIH institutes. There's so many.
That's a good question. I think that certainly having a celebrity increases awareness and fundraising and advocacy. That's very clear. Do they play an outside role in developing research priorities? I don't think so. Other than, so the Michael J. Fox Foundation, for example, raises a lot of money and partners with NIH and with NINDS to come up with research priorities, make sure that things aren't overlapping, we're not doing similar funding. But I'm not sure that they have a outside influence necessarily over what we do and the decisions we make.
Never hear about chronic, or rarely hear about chronic fatigue syndrome these days.
No, it's absolutely true. It's kind of a hidden disease. Absolutely.
I mean, and I think the question is like, do we have powerful messengers that can kind of help us like, get the word out more in an effective way and galvanize participation from a community that might not do so?
I think that's where really utilizing the vendors that we work with, whether it's IdeaScale or another vendor under our NTL, NASA Tournament Lab, because I think they have that ability to engage those kind of trusted messengers or champions, but also our comms department that can help kind of curate that messaging. I think that's where for us, I think that's where that flexibility comes from to have folks that are out there that can garner that kind of excitement and attraction to the idea or the campaign that we're hosting.
Yep. Did you? Nope. Okay. Well, then in that case, please help me thank our wise and generous panelists.